Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining me here on Classic Verse. Today I'm going to begin by providing a brief overview of what I think is necessary to know prior to entering into deeper discussions on ancient pastoral literature. In the future, I will be making more videos that analyze Theocritus and Virgil's poems together with a focus on the humor and comedy involved in their creation. This being the topic of my master's thesis, now underway, I thought I would pick a few points that seem particularly relevant for the purposes of these videos before I feature more in-depth studies of Virgil's Eclogues, along with Theocritus's Idylls. With that being said, I would like to begin with a simple question. What is pastoral? In this video, I'll try to provide one idea that I believe is central to the genre, genre is in quotations. Our preconceived notions about the word pastoral already color any interpretations of this genre of pastoral / bucolic poetry, terms which I will use interchangeably. We think of the countryside and herdsmen singing songs and refined verses, but as with a lot of poetry, it turns out that things get complicated quickly. The progenitor of the genre, or at least the most popular in the ancient Greek world, was Theocritus, who wrote in the 270s BC. After him, there came many poets, whose work is mostly lost, who had developed this genre and worked until Virgil wrote in the 40s and 30s BC and solidified many aspects of pastoral forever and begun the Latin tradition of this style of poetry. So in this video, I would like to go over this one idea surrounding the genre of pastoral, so as to ready ourselves for a more in-depth study. So it makes sense to me to see how a fellow poet of Virgil saw his early eclogues, and to perhaps use this as our starting point. Instead of trying to find common themes, such as the countryside, which have yet to prove fruitful to any study, I suggest that we take a more textual approach. In one of his satires, Horace wrote the quote you see on the screen. The translation and all the others in the future are my own. Rejoicing in rural life, the rustic muses, the Camenae, have granted to Virgil tender and playful, and then I include verses there. That's my own. This is an important piece of evidence when one considers what exactly it is that makes up pastoral. Scholars are certain about this line referring to Virgil's Eclogues, since the satire is published around 34 BC. At this point in time, the Eclogues are the only works we know of Virgil's that were published. The exact meaning of the two adjectives, tender and playful, as I have them translated, have kept scholars busy since antiquity. The ancients were wont to deny any kind of humor in the Eclogues, which led Quintilian, who was an educator and rhetorician of the Roman era writing in Latin in the AD 100s, to conclude that facetum, which I have as playful, could not possibly mean something along the lines of facetious or amusing. See his work Institutio Oratio at 6.3.20. He states instead the word applies to the elegance or grace of the verses, and yet up to this day a translation more along the lines of playful, with which I agree, has been accepted. For example, see the article by Rose in the description. Two other interpretations, among many, are particularly relevant. One is somewhat antiquated from the early 20th century, which translates molle as womanliness, and another that the whole phrase here can be reduced to simply implying the wit of Virgil. I agree with these to some extent, though I wouldn't use the term womanliness, of course. I intend to use the more traditional understanding of what I believe the author is intending to imply, and that is the slenderness or littleness or what have you of these verses, which is a point that I will be returning to. And the wit involved in the Eclogues cannot really be denied, nor can it in Theocritus for that matter. And so I think that it's fair to say that this is the feeling that Horace was trying to evoke to some degree in this phrase. In ancient Alexandria, during its heyday, there were scholarly debates about what type of poetry at this point in the Hellenistic era was the best or most suitable to write. Homer and epics seem to have come and go, along with the tragedies and comedies of the stages. Callimachus, the ever-important poet-scholar of Alexandria, was one who famously emphasized the importance of writing little verses, for example in his Atque at 1.31 to 32, where, through an animal metaphor, he argues in favor of his style of poetry. This is in stark contrast to another famous poet from the Hellenistic era, Apollonius. It goes without saying that Apollonius, the writer of the 3rd century epic, the Argonautica, was on the other end of this debate. He wrote a full-scale epic in the style of the archaic poets like Homer and his counterparts. Theocritus will be seen, however, in writing his Idylls to firmly take the side of Callimachus. Another metaphor may be helpful here. Picture an epic poem like the Iliad, or even a long novel from a more recent era, and imagine it were dried up of all its water or excess words that are there for a reason, but can be done away with to some degree. The way Theocritus and Callimachus approach the issue is through attempting to do a lot with a little. The long scrolls of epics and tragedies are old-fashioned in this view, and at this point poets ought to be explosive, metatextual, short, stripped bare, etc. Theocritus even goes as far as to rewrite 2 episodes from the Argonautica in his proper little or slender style of the Hellenistic period in his 13th and 22nd Eclogues, which detail Hylas as well as the Castor and Pollux and their involvement in the Argonautica saga. These debates are interesting to study, sure, but what we are here to do is to try and get a better understanding of the tradition that Virgil was writing in and what exactly Theocritus created or at least popularized. The most important characteristic, to me, can be summed up as this slenderness or littleness that is incorporated in the verses. It's not really the herdsmen nor the fields of pasture that become the most dominant feature of pastoral poetry, although they are nearly a necessity. Instead, it is the thinness of the lines and their brief but powerful metatextual allusions that can add much vivid imagery to an aspect of a poem without detracting at all from the main elements or even doing anything more than providing a passing reference. Virgil, as all Latin poets did, interacts heavily with his Greek predecessors, and the most clearly recognizable similarity between the Greek and Latin Bucolic traditions is this tendency of plucking away the excesses from your poetry and leaving lots to the imagination of the reader. The issue with introducing one to the genre of pastoral is that it defies the definition. Many scholars have tried to use pieces like the landscape, the speaker as a herdsman, and things such as these to be the criteria for deeming a poem pastoral. One quickly runs into problems, especially within the corpus of Theocritus, when one realizes that most of his Idylls do not meet the criteria. While it is true that Virgil innovates, that is not to say that there were whole-scale inventions to the genre on his part. There had always been deeply serious topics discussed, and the metaphor of the countryside as a place of peace and otium was always at play. The innocence of herdsmen and their ignorance of all things martial and dangerous, or better put, the realities of ancient life, makes them unusual characters in literature. This depiction goes all the way back at least to Homer's epic similes. Suffice it to say that what Theocritus did create was a new genre, but it was not the one that is our current understanding of the word and genre pastoral. These poems, we will see, will contain elements of pastoral, while at the same time featuring urban themes wholly divorced from the countryside. The openness of the genre is what is a large part of its appeal. Virgil titled his works Bucolics, but it has long been recognized that several poems are much less bucolic than the others. See the article by Scafoglio in the description. Aside from providing some background information to this ancient genre, I hope that a look at some ancient authors' opinions on poetry, as well as one Roman's view on the Eclogues, or Bucolics as Virgil titled them, was able to provide insight into how you might like to approach these poems. To summarize, pastoral is not strictly that, as in it is not strictly the countryside and herdsmen and piping and such things, but there is some quality to it where you know it if you see it. As we study these poems more, we will run into many urban themes, both political and cultural, that do not belong to the pastoral world per se. In Theocritus, there are even explicit treatments of mythological episodes, as we've seen, that could still fit under the umbrella term that is pastoral. Virgil is no different. since as ancient commentators understood, a large chunk of his Eclogues are less bucolic, and those are 4, 6, and 10. What I encourage you to pay attention to is what I can only describe through a metaphor, and that is how the verses of these poems are often stripped bare. And this is not to say that other poems are wordy, but that these feature a certain littleness, thinness, etc. to them. And I also hope to have discouraged viewing the genre as a monolith, and to instead approach it textually rather than thematically. If you want to learn more about any of the topics I discussed, please check this bibliography here or in the description. Thanks for watching, and welcome to my channel, and please don't hesitate to leave a comment. Bye.